Okay. I'm gonna admit up front, I wasn't looking for this one. I was actually doing research on something entirely different and wanted to check myself that the MVS, or Multi-Video System Cabinets by SNK, were one of the only multi-game cabinets on the market, when I ran into something I'd never seen before, but maybe you have. The Nintendo PlayChoice 10. Yep, long before SNK came out with a system of interchangeable games on an arcade cabinet, Nintendo had actually been doing this for years. But what was this thing like? Well, if you have a bit, sit back and hang out a while as we take a look at this thing and see how it worked and what games were available for it. The Nintendo PlayChoice 10 was essentially a stand-up arcade machine of, well, the Nintendo Entertainment System. It was actually released in 1986, and the full idea behind it is a little unclear, at least to me, but one mention stated it was used for more of a short-term rental type situation. What do I mean by that, you ask? Well, you could put your quarters in here and select from one of any 10 games, thus the not-so-clever name of PlayChoice 10, and try out any of the games on that particular cabinet. This would be a quick way to see if you wanted to, say, do a longer weekend rental at your video store if you just wanted to buy the game outright. I know what you're thinking. How in the heck are you going to get a feel for an actual NES game experience on a stand-up arcade machine meant to just eat quarters? Isn't that just going to leave a bad taste in your mouth for the game as a whole and not feel remotely like the real deal? Well, you see, Nintendo thought of that by giving you a certain amount of time to play, not lives. Notice I didn't mention on a particular game. Yep, that's right, you can actually swap between any number of the games on the cabinet at any time, or play one for the full time limit. Adding in more coins would obviously give you more time to play the actual cabinet. I kinda suspect this concept itself is one of the reasons the cabinet wasn't more popular. Why would somebody who runs an arcade take up valuable space in that arcade with a cabinet that would give you a guaranteed time, often 10 minutes from what I could find, to play as much as you wanted, when the arcade games were actually set up to have the player done or paying more money in roughly around 3 minutes? That's not to say that players couldn't play longer than that on one arcade machine, but it would take quite a bit more practice to get good enough to last longer, and the average player would still be pumping in money every 3 minutes or so. That's 3 times the revenue from one of these machines versus the PlayChoice style cabinet. But how did this thing operate? What did it look like? Were the games hardwired into the cabinet or slotted in like the MVS systems? These are all really good questions, and ones I think we should take a look at. Now, the PlayChoice cabinet actually came in a few variations. 3 stand-up variations and a countertop model. The first 2, the original and the Super Deluxe model, which honestly I couldn't find out what made it deluxe, had a dual monitor setup. One monitor would show the game time the player had left, along with explanations of what power-ups were in the game and how the game worked, along with random tips for the game itself. The main monitor would show the actual game itself. The more inexpensive stand-up version cut this down to a singular monitor with a dedicated button to pull up the same information that would normally be displayed on the second monitor. Now, the countertop model would actually function in the same manner as the regular low-end standard one. It would just size that would more easily sit on top of a bar top or table or wherever you happen to actually want to put the system at any given time. Now, the internals of these systems actually function the same, with one main motherboard that would allow you to slot ROM carts for the selection of games available to the arcade cabinet. 52 games in total. These ROM boards used in this cabinet were slightly bigger, having about 8K more data to display the extra information to the player. Apparently, the ROMs between the NES and the PlayChoice were so similar that you could pull the ROM boards out of your NES cartridge and actually use them inside the PlayChoice, assuming they had the same pin mappings. They didn't always match up. There's even been a mod made that would allow you to just connect your NES cartridges directly, obviously without the extra data on how to play the game, but I mean, how cool is that anyway? What makes this cabinet so interesting to me is that it actually had a better and crisper colors than the NES itself, outputting RGB instead of the NES Luminous Prominence system. Apparently, the 2 PPU types were actually similar enough that you could pull the PPU off the player choice or vice versa and solder it to the other. But that process was apparently kinda tricky. But I think that's maybe enough of me geeking out about the cabinet and telling you about the system. What do you guys actually think of this one? Did any of you ever get a chance to play one, and what were your thoughts on it? Do any of you have one of your own, or have you owned one, and if so, what was your experience with it? Let me know in the comments. While you're there, if you could do me one more favor, please leave this video a like. And if you haven't, consider following the channel. That helps me out a ton. For now though, thank you so much for making it this far in the video, and until we meet again, happy gaming!